We have a new Golgari commander, black green, that kind of works like a Mycosynth Lattice, while also just being a crazy combo piece. And it's super cool and on flavor, and I love it. Ygra, Eater of All. It's the top of the food chain, so it's making all other creatures foods in addition to the other types. That makes them artifacts in addition to the other types, which creates some interesting synergies. And whenever a food is sacrificed, it gets 2+1/+1 counters. And it has ward sack of food. Sounds really tough to target, right? Well, I mean, that just means sacrifice a creature because all the creatures are food. This card seems super fun though. I love it. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it, and a lot of cool combos as well. We're gonna start off by talking about those combos. Combo number one I wanted to mention. If you have Ygra and Experimental Confectioneer in play, Experimental Confectioneer says whenever you sack a food, you make a 1/1 rat. Well, Ygra says that rat is a food. So let's just say you have Alter Dementia in play. You sacrifice that rat to Alter Dementia to mill somebody a card. Experimental Confectioneer sees that rat dying, and Ygra in play says, hey, that rat was a food. Confectioneer says, oh yeah, it was a food. I'll make another rat. And you just do that over and over and over and mill out all your opponents. You could also replace Alter Dementia with Phyrexian Altar to make infinite mana if you wanted to. This also makes Ygra infinitely big. You can replace Experimental Confectioneer with Camellia, the Seed Miser, also from Bloomburrow. Whenever you sacrifice one or more food, you create a squirrel. Those squirrels are also food, so every time you sack one of those squirrels, you're getting a new squirrel, and so on and so forth. The next combo I wanted to mention focuses on a crowd favorite. Chatterfang makes it so whenever you make a token, you also make a squirrel. Let's just say you have Nuka-Cola vending machine in play with Chatterfang. You sack a squirrel to one of your sack outlets. Nuka-Cola vending machine sees that and says, oh, that squirrel was a food. I'm gonna make a tap treasure. Chatterfang sees that tap treasure come in and says, oh, you made a treasure. I'm gonna make a squirrel. You then sacrifice that squirrel and you'll end up with infinite tap treasures along with whatever your sack outlet does. So if it's Alter Dementia, infinite mill. Since you're going to want to run these cards, Pitiless Plunderer seems like an auto include anyways, and it also goes infinite with Chatterfang with a sack outlet. Perfect. And it seems good outside of combo potential. The next set of combos I wanted to mention include a card that just came out in MH3. There's a handful of cards that make a token whenever a counter is put on them. So Basking Broodscale, Herd Baloth, and Scurry Oak are all great enablers for this. Let's just say you have Basking Broodscale in play and Extruder. Sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Sacrifice the Broodscale token to Extruder because it's also a food. You put that counter on Basking Broodscale and you make another token, and you can repeat that over and over and over again, making an infinitely large Broodscale, along with an infinitely large Ygra and whatever other death triggers you may have. You can replace Extruder with any sack outlet in Mazarek if you want to just put counters on everything and make your entire board infinitely big. And since you're running cards like Scurry Oak and Herd Baloth, you could just toss in Ivy Lane Denizen anyways, it's just another infinite combo. Along with Sadistic Glee and Tarian Soul Reaver. Both of these put counters on things when creatures die, so Basking Broodscale loves them, Herd Baloth loves them, Scurry Oak loves them, works really, really well inside this deck with all of these combo pieces. They don't directly need Ygra, but you're running a lot of cards that work with them anyway, so you might as well. The next combo I want to mention only involves two cards. There's no real way to replace any of the pieces in this combo, but it's a really interesting combo. It's something very different, and I think this is the only commander that allows this combo to really be doable without an extra piece. Dross Scorpion and Feign the Broker. Feign the Broker, you can tap, sacrifice an artifact to create a 2/1 black Inkling creature token. Well, that creature token is also an artifact food, so you can sacrifice that creature token to Feign to reactivate Feign. But you have to tap Feign, so you just add in Dross Scorpion. Whenever it or another artifact creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may untap target artifact. Feign is going to be an artifact creature. Those tokens are going to be artifact creatures. You tap Feign, sack an Inkling. Dross Scorpion says, hey, an artifact creature just died. Let's untap an artifact. So you untap Feign and you can continue to do so. The next combo I wanted to mention includes one card and any sack outlet, ideally like Alter Dementia. Let's say you got Alter Dementia, Ygra in play, and Summoning Station. Summoning Station says you can tap it to make a pincher, and then whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from play, you may untap Summoning Station. Well, that pincher is also an artifact food thanks to Ygra, so you can sacrifice the pincher to Alter Dementia, mill somebody, Summoning Station sees it die and untaps, and you make a new one, and so on and so forth. And we have the last combo I wanted to mention. This one actually involves the +1/+1 counters that Ygra gets. If you have an Ashnod's Altar in play, great sack outlet, you're going to want to run it in the deck anyways, and an animation module, you can go infinite. Ashnod's Altar lets you sacrifice a creature for 2 colorless mana. If you do so, Ygra will see a food getting sacrificed and grow. When Ygra grows, Animation Module will see those counters and go, hey, give me 1 mana and I'll make a servo for you. This will net you infinite colorless mana and infinitely large Ygra. You can also do this with Phyrexian Altar, however you will not end up with infinite mana, but you'll still end up with an infinitely sized Ygra, and whenever death synergies you may have in play will go infinite. Moving on to the next category. This is going to be artifact synergy stuff. You're turning all of your creatures and your opponent's creatures into artifacts outside of Ygra. So cards that can synergize well with artifacts now synergize well with your creatures. There's a lot of cool stuff. Welding Jar can just protect whatever creature you need to protect. Viridian Revel. Whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, that includes their creatures now, you may draw a card. Auto included in this deck, especially because of how good green is at killing artifacts. We will talk about that next. Unwinding Clock, just untap all your creatures at each player's untap step. Transmutation Font, you can sacrifice 3 artifact tokens with different names, search your library for an artifact card, and put it onto the battlefield. So you can sacrifice a squirrel token, a food token, and some token that you make with Transmutation Font. Perfect. Tower of the Magistrate, this land is phenomenal in the deck. You can essentially make Ygra unblockable by giving it protection from artifacts. Teething Wormlet will gain you a lot of life while also just getting really big. Steel Overseer can put counters on everything. Sonic Screwdriver can untap artifacts you control while also being a mana rock. Similarly, you have Laser Screwdriver, which is a mana rock, and you can use it to tap down your opponent's creatures. Scorpec Lord can give your artifact creatures +1 in menace. Sculpting Steel enters the battlefield as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield, so it's just a clone. Scarwood Bandits can steal your opponent's creatures. Sarenth Steelseeker, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to look at the top card of your library and do the thing. Nettlecyst is just a really big body that you can kind of move around. Mirror Works, whenever you have a non-token creature enter, if Ygra is in play, you can copy it. Karn Legacy Reforged, along with Blinkmoth Urn, can generate a lot of extra mana. Inspiring Statuary lets you tap your creatures for mana. Ictekic Salvage Splicer can get really big and make a golem that'll get really big. Fomori Vault can let you dig pretty deep into your deck. Feline Sovereign, Ygra happens to be a cat, so whenever a cat you control deals kind of damage to a player, you could blow up an artifact or enchantment. That means also creatures when Ygra's in play. Plus, it's going to give +1/+1 and protection from dogs, which is obviously so useful. Darksteel Forge to make all your creatures indestructible. Cybermen Squadron to give all of your creatures Myriad when Ygra's in play. Super cool. In a similar vein, you have Cyberman Patrol to give Afflict. Curious Herd is just instant speed, make a buttload of tokens. Crypto Thrall to give your stuff hexproof. Cryptek for repeatable protection on your creatures. Cranial Plating, similar to Nettlecyst. Clockwork Gnomes, it's just repeatable regeneration on artifact creatures. Clock of Omens, I didn't see an infinite combo of Clock of Omens right away. There might be one that's within this list that I'm talking about. However, I'm not positive, but this card has a lot of potential and can do some crazy shenanigans. Chronomancer lets you sack stuff to draw cards, and Canoptic Spider lets you draw cards. Green is very good at blowing up artifacts, so if you make all of your opponent's creatures into artifacts, you'll be able to blow up those creatures very easily and for very good rates. Let's talk about some of the cool removal you can put in this deck, because it's now creature removal. We have a new card in Wear Down, which, as long as you gift a card, if you let somebody draw a card, you can destroy up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments for 2 mana. Seeds of Innocence. Bury all artifacts. Destroy all artifacts. Each artifact's controller gains an amount of life equal to its casting cost. So you can just clear the board outside of Ygra. Anything that says destroy all artifacts, if Ygra's in play, destroys everything that's not Ygra. And there's a couple of those I wanted to mention, like Rampage of the Clans, Fade from History, Creeping Corrosion, and Bane of Progress. Troublemaker Oof is pretty nice because you can sacrifice any creature to bargain since they're all artifacts, and it exiles an artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Trastaire's Devastation, you lose X life and create X tap Power Stone tokens, then all creatures get -1/-1 for each artifact you control. This is just going to be a good way to wipe the board if you really need it. Terra Sunder is 2 mana to exile an artifact or enchantment, and if you don't have Ygra in play, you can pay 2 more mana to make it a non-land permanent. Sword of Sinew and Steel, repeatable artifact removal whenever you deal combat damage. Silverback Elder, similar whenever you cast a creature though. Scavenger Folk is just a 1 mana dude that you can pay 1, tap, and sack to destroy target artifact. There's a couple of cards similar, including Elvish Scrapper and Caustic Caterpillar. Rampaging Yagwai can blow up a ton of different things. Pest Infestation seems like one of the best cards for this deck. You can just pay a ton of mana into it, blow up a billion things, and make a bunch of tokens. Green Slime is pretty cool, especially because you can foretell it. Blissa Sunseeker, I like this one a lot in the deck. You can, for free, just tap and blow things up, as long as you have a use for the mana afterwards. Gate to Phyrexia is very interesting. 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can sacrifice a creature to destroy an artifact. Seems really nice for this deck. Force of Vigor can be 0 mana to blow up 2 things. Druid of Purification is hilarious in this deck and an auto-include. Love this card. Deconstruct, it gets you your mana back, which is pretty nice. Crumble is basically Swords to Plowshares. Broken Bond, you can blow something up and ramp. Boseiju is a channel to destroy a creature when Ygra's in play. Love it. Armix is very solid, repeatable removal. Archdruid's Charm has a lot of utility, including being an exile of artifacts or enchantments. And Acidic Slime, just a lot of utility on that ETB. Along with all of that removal, there's a bunch of cards that just kind of hate on artifacts in green. And if you're turning all your opponent's creatures into artifacts along with yours, these hate cards will be very powerful. You probably have to build around some of them because they could really hurt your game plan if you're just kind of sticking them in the deck. So you kind of want to think about what you're doing when you're using these cards. But there's a very good build that will use all of these. Starting off with the meanest ones that you really would have to build around if you wanted to include, you have Collector Oof and Null Rod. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated, so activated abilities of artifacts and creatures won't be able to be activated. You would really need to build your deck around hating on artifacts and blowing up your opponent's creatures and stuff like that, because otherwise these can shut down your combos just by having them in your own deck. There's also Root Maze. Artifacts and lands come into play tapped, so you can make all lands and all artifacts, and if Ygra's in play, all creatures enter tapped. Manglehorn should be in every single Ygra deck. ETB, destroy an artifact, and artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Magnetic Mine is another one that's more of you need to build around having this in your deck. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to its controller. Kill Switch seems like an auto-include in any Ygra deck. You can just tap all artifacts and they don't untap as long as kill switch is tapped. Love this. So you can just tap kill switch, all the blockers are now tapped, Ygra can hit for a ton of damage. Karn the Great Creator is an auto include in this deck, shutting down all your opponent's activated abilities of their creatures. Another build around is Imi Statue. It's kind of like Winter Orb, but for artifacts. Home of the Radix is another build around. It can really slow down your opponents from playing any artifacts. If you're against an artifact deck, this card's going to put in insane work. And lastly, Haunting Wind. Each time an artifact in play is tapped or its activation cost is paid, it deals 1 damage to the artifact's controller. So whenever anyone activates an ability of an artifact or taps one, they take a damage. There's a few cards I wanted to mention that work well with the +1/+1 counters that you're going to be getting on Ygra. You'll be getting a lot of those, so definitely worth mentioning some counter synergies. Retribution of the Ancients can turn those counters into removal. Branching Evolution can just increase the number of counters drastically. Duskshell Crawler along with Kodama can give trample to Ygra, which is pretty helpful because Ygra is going to get very big. Winding Constrictor and Hardened Scales to increase those counters. And Corpsejack Menace to just double them. One thing to note is that since your creatures are now food, you can sacrifice them to themselves to gain life. There's going to be some good life gain cards you can toss into this deck. You're not going to be gaining life a lot, but in a pinch you definitely can, and there's certain cards that work really well when you do. Witch of the Moors is nice. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent sacks a creature and you return a creature from your graveyard to hand. So you can sack a creature to Witch of Moors and then get that creature back and make your opponent all sacrifice a thing. Banewitch Coven is another way you can get stuff back from the grave. Veto, if you're gaining life, you can drain out your opponents. Same thing with Dina. And then Blossoming Bogbeast can just help you swing in for lethal. All the combos I talked about at the beginning of this video had to do with sacrificing, so I think sacrifice is going to be a good theme to build around with this commander. Being able to loop your stuff in down to your graveyard and just getting kind of value for things dying. So some of the good sacrifice cards I wanted to mention included Arcbound Ravager. This one's interesting in the deck, and I'm sure that there's going to be some situations where it's one of the best sack outlets you could have on board. It's a 2 mana, sack an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it's got modular. So you can sack any creature to it if Ygra's in play, and then also when it dies you can move those counters to any creature in play. So if you're swinging in at somebody, you can sack your whole board and move those counters to a creature that's unblocked, and boom, you can kill them. Viscera Seer is just nice to have, another free sack outlet. Krark Clan Ironworks in this deck is basically a second copy of Ashnod's Altar, auto include. Crawling Infestation can generate some tokens for you to sacrifice. Skullclamp for card draw, same thing with Moldervine Reclamation, and Dark Prophecy. Marin seems like a lot of fun in this deck, being able to recur some of your cheaper stuff. Grave Pact, so you can make your opponents sacrifice their creatures. Blood Artist can drain out your opponents and be a win con in any of these infinite combos. Warren Soul Trader is another card that can easily become an infinite combo piece in this deck. However, you do have to pay life, so not quite infinite. Definitely still worth running. Bastion of Remembrance and Marionette Apprentice both work very well, similar to Blood Artist. Trading Post is pretty cool. You can sacrifice an artifact to draw a card, or you can just pay a life to make an artifact creature. And you can sacrifice a creature to return an artifact from your graveyard if you need to. It's just high utility. Sir Ginger works really well when you're sacrificing your artifact creatures. Soul Devi Adnate along with Priest of Yawgmoth can sacrifice things to generate a lot of extra mana. Sly Requisitioner can generate some tokens. In a similar vein, you have Slagstone Refinery. Ruthless Technomancer, really cool card in this deck and can put in a ton of work. Reprocess along with Lich Knight's Conquest can generate a ton of card advantage. Ravenous Squirrel is a sack outlet to draw a card while also getting really big. Psychomancer is kind of like a Blood Artist in this deck. And Disciple of the Vault, same thing. I've already mentioned a lot of cards that can generate tokens in this video, and there's a lot of cards that synergize well with having tokens. You're going to have tokens in play, so you might as well run some of these cards. Doubling Season and Parallel Lives to double up your tokens. Jaheira, you can turn your tokens into Mana Dorks. Tireless Provisioner can just kind of poop out food tokens, which is pretty helpful in this deck. And Mirkwood Bats can drain your opponents very, very quickly. Food tokens are also tokens, and food seems really good with this deck because this commander's making everything in the food, so you might as well run a lot of food synergy cards too. There's a lot of cool food synergy cards I wanted to mention. First off, we have Cirith Ungol Patrol. It can sacrifice a creature to draw a card and create a food token. You have Witch's Oven. Sack a creature to make a food token. Seems great. Along with that, you have Cauldron Familiar, so you can do the cat oven thing. But also, Cat's just like a combo piece in this deck with any free sack outlet if you can make a token. If you can make a creature token. Because you can use Cauldron Familiar, sacrifice it to, let's say, Phyrexian Altar, trigger something like Camellia, and then boom, you make a new squirrel, which is also a food token, and you can sack that squirrel to Cauldron Familiar in your graveyard now to bring Cauldron Familiar back, and so on and so forth. That's a really, really powerful synergy. Trail of Crumbs, card advantage whenever you sack a food or a creature in this deck. The Shire can pump out foods. Spider Food is targeted artifact removal, perfect for this deck, and it creates a food. Shelob's Ambush, giving Death Touch and creating a food's pretty nice. Savvy Hunter, sack 2 foods to draw a card. Nice little sack outlet there for card advantage. Revive the Shire can bring something back to hand and create a food. Rapacious Guest seems really good in this deck. It's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger whenever you sack a food. And then when it dies, target opponent loses life equal to its power. You could probably just drain somebody out with this easily, especially if you're going infinite. Pippin can pump out foods and also can buff all your creatures and give them haste until end of turn if you wanted to try to go for the win. Peregrine Took is another card that can easily just kind of create its own infinite combo on accident. And it also is a card draw outlet for sacrificing foods. Knight of Sweet's Revenge is really cool. It makes it so all of your foods can tap for green. That means your creatures are mana dorks now. And it can give them a big buff. Greta, Sweet Tooth Scourge, can draw you cards, can grow your creatures. You can use it to trigger your Basking Brood Scale. It just seems great. Gilded Goose is a mana dork that can also sacrifice your foods and also create foods. It's perfect for the deck. Eleanor Gardener can ramp you by sacrificing foods. Bristlebud Farmer. Whenever it attacks, you may sack a food. If you do, you mill 3 cards and put a permanent from among them into your hand, so it's just card advantage whenever you attack, and it also generates some foods. It's a pretty big body. And lastly, Academy Manufactor. This card is kind of funky in the deck, because if you make a creature token, that creature token's also a food, so instead you make a clue, food, and treasure token and not the creature token. It can kind of mess with your infinite combos, but it also can kind of put in a lot of work with some of your other stuff. It's weird, but I'm sure that it's going to be able to put in a lot of work. With KCI, it seems awesome. And lastly, let's talk about the one-off cards. The cards that really didn't fit into any specific category, but are very good and I need to mention them. Mycosynth Lattice can work as an additional copy of Ygra a lot of the time. You also have Biotransference, which can turn your creatures into artifacts as well. Can also enable a lot of your combos. Jared is a great way to just win the game after you make an infinitely large Ygra. Minds of Morgul Dark Fortress is perfect for this deck because you can give Ygra Shadow, so now it can't be blocked and it's going to be huge and kill things. Shadow Spear to give trample and lifelink on Ygra is nice. Plus it can remove hexproof and indestructible from your opponent's stuff. You have a lot of removal in this deck, so it's going to be very helpful. And since you have a lot of removal in this deck, Chevel also seems fantastic, being able to put bounty counters on things and then blow them up. There's Hungry Lynx, which gives your cats protection from rats. That includes Ygra. Whenever a rat dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on each cat you control. That has some niche situations that kind of matter, like Experimental Confectioner. And at the beginning of your end step, target opponent creates a rat, so it gives you something that you can kind of kill. You're going to be killing a lot of your opponent's things, so Revel in Riches could win you the game. Also, since you're killing a lot of your opponent's things, Vraska the Silencer could be a lot of fun in this deck. Tell Gilad Defiance is 2 mana, draw a card, target creature gains protection from artifacts until end of turn. So it's kind of like a one shot, make it unblockable so you can hit somebody for commander damage. And lastly, Liquid Metal Coating and Liquid Metal Torque. So that way you can turn other things that your opponents control into artifacts since you're running so much artifact removal. So you can blow up their Planeswalker with artifact removal or their land with artifact removal. Liquid Metal Torque is also nice because it's a mana rock, so it fits into your mana base. That is everything I have for Ygra. If you had any other ideas I didn't mention, please comment them below so other people can see those as well. And if I was able to help you in any way, please let me know. It makes my day when I see that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Peace out, everybody.